It's been a bumpy road for Armenia and Armenians over the past few months, hasn't it? It began really with a war in the South Caucasus over the enclave of Nagorno-Karabakh, a war that, from all the evidence that I've seen since then, was one that the Armenians were ill-advised and ill-equipped to fight. The consequence of that war, we all know it. Armenians lost not only the occupied territories around the enclave of Nagorno-Karabakh, Artsakh for Armenians, but also parts of the enclave itself. And this was basically enshrined in the truce, in the agreement that was reached with Russian mediation on the 9th of November 2020 in Moscow. Now, since then, since that ill-fated war, since a war that clearly defined victory for one side and defeat for the other, recriminations have been galore. There have been demonstrations in Armenia against the Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan and his government for having lost the war. Labels such as Tavajan, traitor, have been bandied about the place. And there has been a sense of tension, palpable tension in the country, divided as it seems to be between those who support the Prime Minister and think that he was not really at fault for the defeat and the calamitous consequences of the war on the Karabakh front, and those who are hell-bent on seeing him leave his position as Prime Minister. And of course, as I've said in my previous 14 or 15 YouTube episodes on Nagorno-Karabakh, the truth probably lies somewhere in between those two statements. Was he responsible for the result, for the outcome of the war? Did he commit many serious mistakes, not least lifting up the spirit of the Armenians by claiming victory and then bringing those spirits crashing down with quite a bitter defeat? Or was it all the fault of the old oligarchies, the old governments, the corruption that everybody seems to speak about that preceded the revolution that brought Nikol Pashinyan, a journalist, an editor in a newspaper, to power as Prime Minister of this tiny republic of few million? Yes, I think the truth lies somewhere in the middle there, no matter how we interpret it. But feelings are so strong that there have been constant demonstrations against the government. And there has been a constant pushback by the Prime Minister, who has simply refused to resign, despite the fact that those demonstrations were also joined by calls from the spiritual leaders. And I do say leaders because I talk about the two Catholicoi of Holy Echmiadzin and of Cilicia in Lebanon, who called for his resignation, who said he should go. And recently, because of some ill-advised statements by the Prime Minister about asking the United States to restrain Azerbaijan and Turkey, as if the United States proved itself as an ally of Armenia, or casting doubt on the efficacy of the Soviet arms and arsenal that Armenia had during the war. Those ill-advised statements, what they did basically is embitter those two positions even further, so much so that parts of the military, not the whole military, but parts of the military and its generals said that they no longer had confidence in Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan to run the country and that he should therefore resign. A part of the population of Armenia. Armenia is a small country. There are only roughly, 3 million plus or minus that are still living in this tiny post-Soviet socialist republic. In Armenian, we call it Hayastan Umpmene. Armenia is a handful. It's a small, tiny republic surrounded by less than friendly, if not outright hostile neighbors. So where do we go now? The people, as I was just saying, parts of the people, organizations, opposition groups, which sometimes only represent themselves because they themselves have no credibility, no vision, no strategy, and all they want, their objective is get rid of Nikol Pashinyan. The military has now jumped into the fray when some of the generals and its leadership have asked for the prime minister's resignation, as has the church. And the media is, of course, divided between those who support Pashinyan as a reformist, as somebody who came into power in order to clean the corruption that had set so firmly in the structures of the country, and those who think that old faces and old tenets of power are what is needed in an Armenia that tasted the bitter, bitter consequences of defeat. Now, I've spoken about this, as I've said, many a time. I do not personally wish to see the old regime, the Robert Kocharyans and Serge Sarkissians of this world, to come back and run the country. They've had their day, many, many years of it, and they left with a shadow over their achievements and over their accomplishments. Going back is almost like going back to the status quo ante, and I think that would not be in the interest of Armenia today, let alone perhaps even of Nagorno-Karabakh, although that in itself is an entirely different political ballgame. I also do not think that the Armenian church should become too actively involved in politics. I was encouraged when the Catholicos of all Armenians, Karekin II, asked for restraint and calm in the face of the latest demonstrations that some of us witnessed and others saw on the telly yesterday. So leave the old oligarchy and old league aside, leave the church aside, and the military, in my opinion, and according to my own instincts, should stay out of politics. The military is there to protect the republic. Politicians are there to make policies and to exercise politics. So that brings us back full circle to the people who should act. And those are the Prime Minister and his ministers, his acolytes in some ways. And here is where I would like to share with you today, having seen the tensions yesterday, having seen a gathering of about 20,000 in one of the squares of the Republic in the capital, Yerevan, supporting the Prime Minister, who is quite a populist person. And on the other side, in another square nearby, half that number perhaps, about 10,000, clamoring for his resignation and for a change in government. Now, I've always said that it is not my role as a diasporan Armenian. I am Armenian, but I am living in the diaspora, and therefore I do not think personally that I have the right to impress or apply my own convictions on the politics of the country. But like all Armenians, whether diasporan or in the Republic, I have the right to make my opinions heard. And therefore, in the face of this tension, this cleavage in the country, this tug of war that is going on, this contest between popular sovereignty on the one hand and national sovereignty on the other, the former perhaps leading to populism and ultimately authoritarianism, which isn't something I'd like to see come back to Armenia, and national sovereignty, which is steeped in international relations and international law as well. Somewhere there, somebody should act. Now, is the Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan responsible for what happened in Nagorno-Karabakh, for the defeat, for the misdescription of what was happening over the 6 weeks of war? Yes, to some extent, because it happened on his watch. But no, to some other extent, because he was there for only 2 years, whereas the older politicians, those who were booted out in that so-called revolution, between inverted commas, were also responsible for where Armenia is today and for the angst felt by many, many Armenians across the world. So, in a situation that is tenuous and becoming increasingly untenable, what needs to be done? What needs to be done is to define a strategy, a vision, if you like, that takes us out of this impasse. And vision is not what I see today. The opposition's vision, and it is not a vision, it is not a strategy, get rid of Nikol Pashinyan and his ministers. The vision and strategy of the government is push back and make sure that Nikol Pashinyan stays in, continues his anti-corruption reforms, and trying to strengthen the economy. Words that I've heard, but the action is still not there. In the middle of this, my instincts as a conflict resolution lawyer, as somebody who has basically dealt with other conflicts, somebody who has written about those conflicts, I always try to find a middle ground that would ensure that we do not end up with a lose-lose situation, but that we come near enough to what could be described a win-win situation if we were to show some self-sacrifice for the sake of the nation. The national security and well-being and future prosperity of this tiny republic depends on how its politicians, whether in government or in opposition, whether those in the squares, in the churches, or in the barracks, how they respond to this challenge that we face today. And that challenge starts with the person who is in power today, who is in charge of the republic today, and that is the prime minister. It is not the president who's been sitting on the fence and unsure how to express his own convictions given the constitutional realities, the new realities of the republic, or the other parties that I have spoken about. So what I suggest for possible consideration as a diasporan Armenian who looks in with lots of empathy, one, I think that the Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan should tender his resignation. The calamity of the defeat happened on his watch. No matter the history of this conflict, which goes back to the early 1990s, or the mechanics of the last 6-week war last year. He should tender his resignation. Two, what should happen is a caretaker prime minister should be appointed in his place who comes from his party. So we're not talking about any other interloper or intrusive behavior by any other party. Somebody from his party becomes caretaker, prepares for a general election. And the third point, therefore, is a general election that takes place, leading, number four, to the new realities, because let's face it, the prime minister does not have the same support today that he had when he was swept into power with a very strong, robust majority. These forces should come together, should work together as a coalition, as a unity government in an emergency situation that Armenia is facing, economically, politically, militarily, in order to strengthen the resources of this country and its very, very capable citizens, in order to get us all, Armenia, the Republic, and Armenians worldwide, from this mess. Is it possible for us to detect that vision, that strategy that goes beyond talk, 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 yell and shout and protest? Where is the roadmap? Where is the compass that shows the direction of travel for this country in the midst of all the challenges it is facing? Challenges from neighbors, challenges internally, challenges to its resources, and of course, challenges just next door in the enclave of Artsakh or Nagorno-Karabakh. This is a moment of reckoning, in my opinion, for Armenia and Armenians. Coming out with releases, strongly worded releases, pitching one way or another, might amuse or satisfy the drafters of those releases. What is needed is action to get us out of this pit, to reform the system in such a way that it becomes workable again, and to make it possible for Armenia, which, unlike many of its neighbors, does have democracy embedded in its system, exercise, re-energize that democracy, get a vision and a strategy, and work on those by giving the population who is allowed to vote the right to choose their leaders, bring them together, and try to devise a roadmap that takes us out, not only of the difficulties and hardships, but also the challenges and perils ahead. I can only say, good luck, Armenia, because when I say good luck, Armenia, it also means good luck to us Armenians across the world. Take care.